Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hajar Naili. I'm a former staff of the International Organization for Migration and a forever friend of the organization. I'm thrilled to host such exciting event that honors the lives and stories and contributions that migrant makes in our society here in the US and elsewhere around the world. We have a packed program with a music performance and a movie this afternoon. We'll also hear from two men who fled violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. After living in a refugee camp for about 20 years, they were granted resettlement here in the United States and started their lives from scratch here. Speaking of resettlement, we will also hear from the men who created the refugee program at the Department of State, Mr. James Purcell, who is with us today. In a short moment, I will also give the floor to Ashraf Noor, the director of the International Organization for Migration here at the United Nations, and we will also hear remarks from the ambassador of Ireland to the United Nations. If you want to live tweet this event or share snippets of this event, which I would like to encourage you to do so, please, you can use the hashtag Migrants Day, and also remember tagging IOM at UN. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Hala Liza Ghafouri. Hala is an Iranian immigrant poet, translator, composer, and vocalist living in Brooklyn. Her forthcoming book of Rumi translations will be published by New York Review Books in April 2021, and her own poems have appeared in Love and Forgiveness for a More Just World, published by Columbia University Press and other journals. In her performances, she weaves song, story, and poem together, inspired by her Persian roots. She has performed at venues such as the Lincoln Center, the Bonnaroo Festival, and Carnegie Hall. Hala is the daughter of Iranian immigrants who came to the US in the 70s. In this performance, Hala will be accompanied by Jesse Reagan-Mann. Jesse has performed at the White House, the Met Ball, Radio City, Carnegie Hall, and on TV, performing with many artists such as Beyonce, Jay-Z, Billy Joel, and many others. So I will now give the floor to Hala and Jesse.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Abdir, for inviting us. I want to start with a little story, something that happened some years ago. I was driving down Palisades Parkway in New Jersey, and I was speeding, probably going 10 miles above speed limit, and saw the lights behind me flashing. A cop stopped me. I pulled over to the side of the road. He came to my window, asked me for my driver's license and registration. So I handed that over, and he looked at my license, and he looked up at me. He looked back at my license, looked up at me again, and said, "Does your father have a beard?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Does he work at Hackensack Hospital?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Dr. Ghafouri?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "He saved my wife's life and my son's life." And I was speechless and stunned. My friends in the driver's seat kind of gasped, and he said, it was 3:30 a.m., and my wife was in labor, and she was bleeding profusely. And doctors had come in to try and do something, and nothing really was working. So at 3:30 in the morning, one of the nurses yelled out, "Someone call Dr. Ghafouri." So they called your father, and he got there by 4:15 a.m. He told me the exact time, and he said, "She's alive, and my son is now 5 years old." So I am not going to give you a ticket, and here's your license. And I went home and told my dad the story, and he said, "Hala, why were you speeding?" So my parents came from Iran in the 70s, and they had met at University of Tehran Medical School. And they had the intention of furthering their education here and going back, but then the revolution happened in 79, so they decided to stay and decided to build their lives here and build their family here. And one of the things they brought from Iran were books of poetry. Many different poets, one of them being Rumi, who I imagine many of you have heard of, the Persian mystical sage Rumi. And he, of course, in a way, his poetry, his poems are immigrants. They have traversed 8 centuries and traversed the oceans and crossed the border from one language into another to make it onto coffee tables and bedside tables and bookshelves of millions of homes around the world. And when I was a kid looking out at the Hudson River, but among the soundscape of sitcoms and game shows and the nightly news, I would sometimes hear my mother recite his words. آب حیات عشق را در رگ ما روان کن آب حیات عشق را در رگ ما روان کن روان کن روان کن ده به کفم یگانگی تفرقه را یگانه کن ده به کفم یگانگی تفرقه را یگانه کن عشق خردم شکار تو تیر زدن شعار تو شست دلم به دست کن جان مرا نشانه کن آب حیات عشق را در رگ ما روان کن آینه صبور را ترجمه شبانه کن شبانه کن آب حیات عشق را در رگ ما روان کن روان کن روان کن. Thank you. The translation is let love, the water of life, flow through our blood. Let's translate night through a love-drunk mirror seeped with morning wine. You who pours the wine, this is the divine wine of love that the mystic poets are always talking of. You who pours the wine, put the cup of oneness in my hand and let me drink down till I can no longer imagine separation. Love, you are the archer. My mind is your prey. Carry my heart and make my existence your bullseye. So this is one of the first poems in the book that will come out in 2021. And one of the things that will also happen in this book is I will define certain words that are very common in Persian mystical poetry but have no one-to-one equivalent in English. So they offer us new perspectives, and some of them have even are kind of invitations to more refreshing states of being, like the word fana, which is this tiny little word that means a state in which one has shed all the oppressive attributes of ego and dissolved in a sea of love. So it's a state of mind where we are overtaken by a very robust, all-encompassing love that is something we develop and cultivate through practice and devotion, and that this love takes us beyond obsessions with X versus Y, you versus me, us versus them, and reminds us of the inherent unity of all things. So whether we emerge from one source we call God, or we call it, the Big Bang that happened 14 billion years ago, we all emerged from this one source. And so Fanna is sort of a recognition of this and a kind of surrender, a kind of ego death, and a union with love. And of course, as Rumi says, he sort of sums it up in this couplet. He says, "The ocean I am, drowned in itself. How wondrous to be a shoreless ocean." And of course, we still have to walk the streets, and we are still in our separate bodies, and we still have to catch the Q train and eat lunch and make meetings and so on. But the idea is that this sensation be a psychic undercurrent that accompanies us through our lives and invites us into a more relaxing and loving state of existence. As Rumi says, آمد این بهار جانها ای شاخ تر برقصا از پا و سر بریدی بی پا و سر برقصا بی پا و سر برقصا فنا شو فنا شو فنا شو فنا شو. So you hear that word fanna, fanna, fanna. And Shaw is like, do it, be it, become it. The last song I will do features lyrics from Hafez, who is another Persian poet, another Persian mystical poet, who kind of ousted Rumi in a way. Rumi has been the best-selling poet in America for 30 years. And I think Hafez in the last years has sort of taken over that title. We have some kind of obsession with Persian poets in this country, and most of us don't even realize it. But it really is true. There's a hunger for the mystical message, I think. So this next song then features his lyrics, and the song will be released on a compilation called Borderless Lullabies. If you haven't heard of it, I suggest you check it out. A wonderful woman named Morley put it together, and it features lullabies from all over the world, and the proceeds go to KIND, which is an organization that helps provide legal support for children, immigrant and migrant children who are unaccompanied and don't have any kind of legal support. Some of them fleeing poverty, fleeing trafficking, fleeing abuse. And so this is one way to offer support and help. So this will be then released on that compilation, which I suggest you check out. It has many beautiful songs, on December 22nd. So here is, and the poem says, "It's a pity for a bird like you to live in a land of sorrow. I am taking you to the high nest of devotion. On the path of love, there is no distance to measure, no near or far. I see you clearly as if you were here, and I send you these blessings and this bounty." ای هدهد صبا ای هدهد صبا ای هدهد صبا به صبا میفرستمت میفرستمت بنگر که از کجا به کجا میفرستمت میفرستم حیف است طایری چطور در خاکدان غم زینجا به آشیان وفا میفرستم در راهش مرحله غرب و باد نیست میبینم عیان و دعا میفرستم حیف است طایری چطور در خاکدان غم زینجا به آشیان وفا میفرستم در راهش مرحله غرب و باد نیست میبینم عیان و دعا میفرستم
Thank you so much. Is this microphone on now? Thank you so much, Hala and Jesse, for this performance and taking us through the meaning of your music and poetry. So thank you. Maybe you want to share how people can remain informed with your work and upcoming releases?
Sure. Hala Liza. Actually, my name is on here, so it's just halaliza.com. Simple.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. So now that we all got warmed up with some music and poetry, it's time to hear a few words from Ashraf Noor, the director of the IOM at the United Nations. His remarks will be immediately followed by Her Excellency Geraldine Byrne Nason, permanent representative of Ireland at the United Nations. Prior to her appointment to the United Nations, Ms. Nason was Ireland's ambassador to France and Monaco from 2014 to 2017. In 2014, she was also elected a member of the Royal Irish Academy, Ireland's highest academic honor. I'm giving the floor right now to Ashraf Noor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your presence here today. 18th December is when the UN every year observes the International Migrants Day. We are gathered here today on this special occasion to pay tribute to migrants' contributions to our societies. We sometimes like to speak about glorious migration journeys that changed the course of history. But we often forget the experiences, success stories, and sacrifices of individual migrants. And today, we would like to celebrate the human face of migration. We would like to give recognition to migrants, not as numbers, but more importantly, as human beings. IOM believes that migration is just a natural phenomenon. It is a human reality deeply rooted in every society. And people can move from one place to another very often for good reasons. Therefore, human mobility should not be prohibited or restricted or even worse, criminalized. And instead, we ought to manage it well and to regulate it properly. And we now have even the tools to do that. Thanks to the inclusion of migration-related targets in the 2030 Development Agenda, and to the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration in Marrakesh in December 2018. Migration could be problematic if it gets out of hand. But well-managed migration is likely to be beneficial to all. And in that sense, we consider migration to be a strong catalyst for economic growth, a powerful driver of migration dynamics, and an important bridge that effectively connects people's cultures and civilization. Migration today is a key pillar of our multilateral system, but also an important feature in many of our multicultural societies. The global record on migration is predominantly positive. And migrants everywhere is adding value to the society that they are in. And the UN set aside the International Migrants Day in recognition of the 272 million international migrants who are in our world today and are already integral members of our society. The day also gives recognition to host communities, as well as to the solidarity and support that migrants receive from the larger civil society. And in all of that, IOM is committed to a whole of government and society approach to manage migration and to enhance the protection and the assistance of migrants. And let me end maybe with two announcements. The first one is to say that IOM has chosen this year to focus on the theme of social cohesion to celebrate the International Migrants Day globally. This is a good choice because on one hand, it gives recognitions to migrants' contributions, and on the other hand, it recognizes the generosity of the host community. The recognition is also considers migrants to be just part of our everyday life. migrants can be beside us in the classrooms, workers in the factories, farmers in the fields, and they contribute equally to everyone which is in that particular society. And we therefore need to come together and ensure that they will also be treated like equal right holders. I think the call on everyone here is to come together and turn the tide on the toxic narrative on migration. Let us put our hands together to restore tolerance and objectivity to the migration debate. The other announcement, which is a small one, that IOM and Fordham University are advertising a competition for writers from all backgrounds and who are residents of New York City to contribute stories that will depict any unpublished work that they have done related to migration. We will have an independent jury that will look at the works that will be collected, and we hope that the winners, their work will be published as part of collections that IOM and the university will publish together. Let me finish this by again restating IOM visions for migration to be humane and orderly, and for people to be able to move not out of necessity, but as a matter of genuine choice, and for migrants' rights and dignity to be respected throughout their migration journeys. I thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Giayev, so Anna Hersaramva and Shahanu, using a language that's not an official language of the UN yet, I like to say. It's Irish. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm the Irish Permanent Representative, and it's a deep, both professional and personal privilege to be with you today to mark International Migrants Day. I want to say a particular thank you to dear Ashraf al-Noor, who really is an extraordinary and a powerful advocate for migrants wherever they are, and your organisation, the IOM, is really quite an extraordinary voice for those who need it most, and we salute you particularly today. I know that I have a number of colleagues in the room. I wanted in particular to thank our colleagues from Mexico, Bangladesh and Benin, who are playing a real leadership role in the work on migration here at the United Nations, and we as Irish diplomats really look forward to continuing our partnership with you. Now, I will say a few words to you about the global perspective on migration, but of course, as the permanent representative of Ireland, you'll have to allow me a little privilege at the beginning to say something about the experiences of my own country. If you know anything about my own country, simply put, really, migration is central to Irish consciousness. We, as a people, are a migrant people. We always have been from our origin, through a deep and desperate famine and into this modern period. So from the small country that I come from, historically we have seen our people leave in their millions. And we're happily now a country of net immigration. Today, 1 in 6 of people on the small island of Ireland was not born on the island of Ireland. We are a country that has been transformed. So from a place where people were forced to leave to a place where we can now make good on the traditional greeting in our own native language you heard me use there, of saying Céad Míle Fáilte, which means 100,000 welcomes. We're a country that's relieved in its modern phase of the scourge that we have endured for a long time. I wanted to begin with a toast in our own language, It relays something of Ireland's migration experience. So in Gaelic it goes fad sail, gob fluch agus bos an éireann. And you translate it into our second language, English, it means may you have a long life, a wet mouth, which actually means prosperity rather than anything else, and and also importantly, may you die in Ireland. But you need to think about that last part, because the toast reflects an inherent truth for us about migration in wishing, deeply wishing, an eventual return to Ireland. For many, the decision to leave the homeland, friends, family, networks, culture, language, and all that's familiar, to set off to life elsewhere, is not a decision taken usually voluntarily, lightly, and is fraught with difficulty, as Ashraf said. So I wanted to pick up on the point that you made, Ashraf, in your introduction about countering negative rhetoric. Migrants today are all too frequently treated as a threat to the public, a threat to public health and security, and as somehow adding to the burden of the host population. Moreover, we see migrants increasingly pictured as threatening national identities. We have unfortunately seen heated debates on the threat posed by imminent so-called floods of migrants. There is certainly a need to engage with host communities and to understand some feeling of unease and fear. However, let me be today, on today's day, categorical. There can be no place for racist tropes in our public discourse. Ireland believes that migrants should not be made scapegoats for domestic political difficulties. All member states need to recognise the benefits of welcoming migrants and of setting adequate frameworks for their participation in local economies and in local societies. Films as the one I know we will see perhaps a little bit later set out in many ways the real role, the reality that migrants play substantially in their adopted lands. Too rarely, if ever actually, in the media certainly we hear of the positives, the contribution that so many member states' economies gain, and indeed their societies benefit from, of incoming migrant populations. 10 to 12% of global GDP is provided by migrants. That's the reality we want to see understood and reflected. Another reality often missed, even in this House, the great parliament of men and women, we miss the fact that most migration is not south to north. In Africa, over 70% of migration happens within countries on the continent. This owes, of course, much to common cultural, ethnic affiliations, shared languages, etc. But while this is a complex picture, there are actually serious issues underneath that we need to address. These migrants bring with them, as they arrive in host communities, a range of skills and expertise at all levels that can reduce occupational gaps, that can widen the tax base, promote trade, promote innovation, entrepreneurship, investment, and develop local economies. We have seen that in Ireland, and we know it happens elsewhere. There's an importance to what we do in this House to everything I've just said. Today, more people than ever live in a country other than the one they were born in. In 2019, the number of migrants globally has reached an estimated 272 million. That's 51 million more than just 9 years ago in 2010. International migrants make up for 3.5% of our global population. While many migrate out of choice, many others we know are migrating out of necessity, and this is a critical distinction. The number of forcibly displaced people around the globe now tops 70 million. This number includes almost 25, these are extraordinary numbers, 25 million refugees, 3.5 million asylum seekers, and 41 million internally displaced people. We have to take heed of such shocking figures. The essential work of this House, as I see it, is in tackling the refugee crisis as an example of how important and relevant multilateralism is to actually getting down to solve some of the world's key challenges. I want to pay again tribute to the work that the IOM is doing in carrying this out, in fact. You need our support, and we know that, and I wanted to assure you, Mr. El-Noor, that from Ireland you have it. In December 2018, the UN membership voted to endorse the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. Ireland's approach is not one of qualified or timid support. We believe that the GCM represents a shared understanding, a balanced framework for cooperation on migration between countries and regions, which may have different perspectives and different experiences of migration. But we in Ireland believe that migration is by definition a process that involves multiple countries of origin, multiple countries of destination, and multiple countries of transit. So it should be obvious, indeed it is to us obvious, that managing such a process must involve international cooperation. No one country can address this issue on its own. Multilateralism in Ireland, we believe, is the only way forward. Human rights and migration. When thinking about today, I thought sincerely about the human rights of migrants, and I want to draw inspiration from the late, great Peter Sutherland, the UN Special Representative for International Migration from 2006 to 2017. A proud Irishman, Peter was deeply moved by the 2015 migration crisis in the Andaman Sea and the Mediterranean. He strongly urged the global community to address the complex challenges of mixed migration and championed the cause of protecting the human rights of both migrants and refugees. Peter Sutherland was really a giant of the international stage and a powerful advocate for migration. He created the Global Forum on Migration and Development, and he was key to the convening of the first ever UN Summit on Migrants and Refugees, which happened in September 2016. He was also critical to IOM's entry into the UN and was keen to ensure that the global system had a dedicated agency to support migrants and governments in managing migration worldwide. Peter Sutherland himself witnessed the shocking conditions of migrants and refugees seeking safety, and he never shied away from speaking out in their defense when it was neither profitable nor popular to do so. He was rightly indignant and sharply critical of the failure of many rich countries to welcome those who are fleeing violence or to put sufficient resources into rescuing those drowning in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. He was an Irishman. He had migration in his heart. Without wanting to diminish the importance of the GCM as regards human rights, our main concern really should not be, I think, so much with the compact itself. It's rather with the protection and the realization of the human rights of migrants. Of course, many of these are reflected in the compact, but action in this area of human rights and migrants has never depended and should not depend only on the compact. They flow from the obligations that states already have, regardless of whether they support, reject, or are ambivalent about the compact. So we need to look at this issue, in my view, from the perspective of the tools we also already have in the international and national institutional frameworks. When it comes to protecting migrants' rights, including, importantly, women and girls, there is a vital challenge I want to highlight. This is the erosion of the idea that migrants have rights in the first place. Like Ireland's President, Michael D. Higgins, I fully agree with the UN Secretary General when he says that the only way for migration to be sustainable and safe, not irregular and inhumane, is for it to be of their own volition and not of necessity. This means having integrated policies. However, where their movement is voluntary or forced, all human beings must have their dignity upheld. A starting point for all of us in a world where there is so much migration and so much of it is inevitable and necessary, is that it should be well managed and safe, not irregular and dangerous. And this, frankly, is something that can be achieved with political goodwill and genuine, sincere cooperation. I'm ashamed at the tendency more and more towards the dehumanization of migrants, and therefore the notion that migrants do not deserve rights. It is leading to a perception that those who attempt to cross borders without permission deserve whatever potentially horrible fate awaits them, whether that may be drowning at sea, being held in detention for long periods without children, or being deprived of access to basic services, starvation, or forced to live in appalling conditions. In relation to women and girls, these dangers are multiplied, including increasingly due to their vulnerability by trafficking, sexual violence, and abuse. As I said at the beginning of this, I'm ashamed. But I'm also Irish, and I believe that all is not lost. Within the darkness, there is light. I'm strongly of the belief that multilateralism is a torch that can shine the light. To echo again the sentiments of my president, Michael D. Higgins, I applaud the leadership Secretary General Guterres and Mr. Vitorino at the IOM are continuing to show. To conclude, I wouldn't be Irish if I hadn't got a literary reference. I'd like to finish with an excerpt of a poem, which has actually just been written a few weeks ago by President Michael D. Higgins, who is a president, poet, philosopher, of whom we're very proud. This poem is actually on the topic of migration, as entitled Of Journeys, and it's inspired by an Irish proverb, the one I like best and which I use consistently in this house. The proverb in Gaelic is Feis Scahacéla a Warren Nadini, that people live in the shelter, not the shadow of each other. And I quote from the poem, quote, "The migrant journey resumed. Was not the script of prophets informed by uncertainty? Did it not offer to a foretelling of all the migrant journeys to come, sometimes in the warmth of sharing, too often in the shadow of fear? Nothing is fully foretold. All journeys reveal what we do in the shelter of one another." Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Ashraf. I was reminded as well that you can follow this event online via the webcast, and you can also find video clips already on the UN Web TV Twitter account. So it's movie time right now. So we are about to watch a movie, and it's not any movie, I would like to say. One Way Ticket is a documentary about the extraordinary journey of Jean-Pierre family and their friend Isaiah, who are with us today. So both fled the violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and lived in a refugee camp in Uganda for 20 years before starting a new life in the United States. This documentary, One Way Ticket, is the story of men and women who lost everything and are now reinventing their future in an entirely new world. The film, directed by French filmmaker Grégoire Gosset, is a beautiful journey that takes us from Uganda to the US. Grégoire is also with us today. We will have a chance to hear from him after the movie and to hear as well from Jean-Pierre and Isaiah. But right now, before hearing from them, I invite you to watch the movie.
I'm called Bahati. This is a lucky person. So I'm lucky. I'm lucky because whatever I think of, at least I get it. Whatever I think of, I get it. When I'm someone who has read books, I have attained enough knowledge, I can be a doctor. Because doctor actually saves the lives of people, works for the community. That's my dream.
Today I'm free because I can do what I want. That's a dream. That's a dream. I'm trying to dress like Americans. I'm working with Americans. I keep time, not stay African time. Everything's like America. That's why I feel like American. Je suis quitté mon pays Congo en 1996. C'était la guerre. Tu vois, avec des machettes, avec des fusils, ils prenaient des femmes par force, ils prenaient les gens, les jeunes gens, pour aller au champ, dans la forêt. Ils violaient les filles, les enfants à l'école, ils prenaient et partent avec les enfants de l'école.
Ko yatangiye ntawe ndetse ubwo numva ko nakumenya none ugomba kumbwira ko twari dusubiye mu rugo bari kuvuga ngo intambara yashize dusubiye mu rugo igihe nshizeho inkono ndenda guteka wagiye kureba inka ngo bamunasira iyo ngiyo.
Quand nous avons entendu des bruits des fusils et les gens fuient, c'est pour cela que nous avons aussi pu fuir. Tout, on a laissé. Ils sont partis comme je suis comme ça.
Tuliondoka kwa sababu ya kuua watu. Wanakuja wanaingia mnyumba, unakuta wewe unalala, wanakukamata, wanakuua ama wanalunguza nyumba, wanakulunguzia ndani na jamaa.
Ambia Farao nimeokoka, sitarudi tena Misri, naenda Amerika, naenda Amerika, naenda Amerika, naenda Amerika.
Maisha ya kusema sasa watoto ni kwa sababu tulikuwa nalima kama mimea, kuna kwa wakati season inaharibika, ina mimea, ndio mtu na hangaika kutafuta chakula ya watoto.
J'ai 5 enfants. Je veux qu'ils partent à l'école pour étudier. Et après l'éducation, c'est là bien. J'espère qu'en arrivant en Amérique, je vais faire quelques emplois. J'espère à travailler, soutenir, exporter ma famille. Il n'y a pas de comparaison ici là où nous sommes parce qu'on ne peut pas comparer l'Amérique avec là où nous sommes. Parce que vous savez que l'Amérique, c'est un pays développé. La santé, l'éducation, et même pour quoi manger aussi, je pense que ça, c'est là une change. Je n'ai peur de rien. Je n'ai peur de rien.
We're in Uganda right now.
Yeah.
You'll be living in Entebbe. You said this is Entebbe?
Yeah.
Okay, you'll be living here and you'll fly to America. You go to JFK International Airport in New York.
Okay.
So in this process, you're going to cross this sea, the North Atlantic Sea.
Mm-hmm.
You fly beyond. This is water, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
This is water. You'll be flying from here over the water to America. Then you go to New York.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lori. Natoka Songa. Natoka Si. Se, mnashinda. Kibari wanachinipa. Kibari wanachinipa. Oui. Ces gens sont ici parce qu'ils veulent célébrer avec moi mon départ. On va dialoguer, je vais leur faire quoi à boire et on va manger, tout ça. Parce que c'est le dernier nuit, c'est le dernier c'est avec ces gens-ci. Je ne pense pas que je vais regretter de l'Afrique. Je pense que je n'aurai pas de regretter. Ntabwo ufite ubwoba ko wenda Afurika wizeye ko uyivuyeho kutazongera wenda no kugarukamo?
ntabwo.
Abana bawe bari mu nkanje n'abuzukuru bawe bose bazaba abanyamerika batakiriho Abanyafurika.
Niho ni.
Joseph, c'est mon voisin. Oui. Celui-ci, c'est mon chairman, le chef de notre localité ici. Je vais dire au revoir à moi et je dis au revoir à lui aussi.
Chantal, yewe mugire urugendo rwiza mwari. Mugire se batabasiga.
C'est pas quand on va les voir encore. Des années, des années.
Non, on va se revoir quand même.
Oh,
je ne meurs pas. Je ne meurs pas.
On va te rejoindre là-bas.
Physiquement, nous ne sommes pas ensemble, mais moralement.
Dieu vous prête lui.
C'est Marie.
Venez mzuri wa.
Are we happy? Yes, you say yes, everyone is sure. Mama? Happy? So you will travel from here today. This morning we are going to leave Changwale refugee settlement and we are all traveling to Kampala. In Kampala, we are going to stay at the IOM Transit Center. This IOM Transit Center, that's where you will go and stay for 5 days. During the 5 days, you'll be doing a daily medical check so that you are fit to travel to America. Okay, the good news is this time you're going to have an IOM escort moving with you to America. And also in the plane, there's a location for toilets. It's always have a sign. So when you go there, you'll find a small hole on the door. If that hole on the door is having a small part which is red like this one, that means there's somebody inside, it's occupied. And when it is green, where's the green color? When the small hole is green like here, that means the toilet is actually empty. So you can push and then you enter, okay? If it is occupied, don't feel ashamed to stand and wait so that you can enter.
I'm called Bahati, B-A-H-A-T-I, Bahati. I'm 28 years old. I expect to get some life gonna change. Life gonna change, and I expected to have new friends.
Bye-bye, Mukadde. Dans mon cœur, il y a une chose dans mon cœur de la joyeuse. Je te le dis, je suis très content.
Boys and youth fight. Okay. So the young ones might be going to the lower bed, walale kwa kitanda chini, alafu wakubwa watalala juu.
uramenye ko uvuge ko ari mugenzi wanjye wabonaga ndi mugenzi wanjye
All right. So we had to cut this movie short, but I hope that it gives you you got a glimpse into this movie and you will want to continue watching this movie. In the bios on your table, you have the contact information of Grégoire Gosset, who is the filmmaker. You can be in touch with him as well if you would like to organize a screening for this movie, or if you would like to share this movie with friends and have a discussion as the one we will be having right now. So I'm joined right now by Grégoire Gosset, who is the filmmaker, director, and producer of One Way Ticket. Isaiah is also here, and Jean-Pierre is joining us. So both Isaiah and Jean-Pierre fled the violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1996 and found refuge in Uganda. And so after living for 20 years in a refugee camp, they were offered resettlement in the United States. So while Isaiah currently lives in Chicago, Jean-Pierre lives with his family in York in Pennsylvania. I will also ask to Mr. James Purcell to join me. James Purcell is the former Director General of the International Organization for Migration. He's also the former Director of the U.S. State Department's Bureau for Refugee Programs, and he's currently also the chairman of the nonprofit USA for IOM based out of Washington, D.C., and he's also the author of a book that was recently published that we will be also discussing about in a few minutes. We're in danger. Who will help us? So first question I would like to ask to Isaiah and Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre, this is your first time back in New York since you've landed about 2 years ago straight out of Uganda. I would like to ask you how you feel about being back in New York, and to both of you, how do you feel about watching these images of you back in Uganda and in your very first day in the United States? Do you want to talk?
Thank you, Madam. I'm very happy to be here again in New York. I always look at it as a miracle for me because my first time, I didn't know where I am. I didn't know whether it is night or daytime. But this time I have a chance to see that I came here during the daytime. Although I came very late in the afternoon, but I was able to know that it's during daytime. So I'm very pleased and very happy and happier to come back and be able to watch and see really the buildings and the nature of the New York. I'm really very happy, and I thank for the organizers.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, it's a big pleasure for me to be in New York. It's actually my first time, and I'm so excited. However much it's almost like Chicago. But as you have been watching the One-Way Ticket as a film that was featured on us, actually you can see that there is a big transition. From that life in the camp to this life, there is a huge change. And yeah, I'm so happy for people who organized that. That's God's reward. God will reward them, because I'm so excited of being in the United States. Yeah, and I pray so that those who are still in the camp suffering can also join me. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to still stay with you, Jean-Pierre and Isaiah. And so it's been about 3 years now that you've been in the United States. Could you maybe tell us how your lives have changed since you've been here in the U.S., and has it been difficult to adjust to living in a foreign country after 20 years spent in a refugee camp?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. I think there's a lot which was changed, and for sure I can't make a comparison because in the refugee camp is different because that's the situation which is very, very bad. When you look at the movie, you found the water, the homes, everything is, there's no comparison because here in America, the thing is automatically. Like we're used to use, let me start maybe from the bathroom. That's something which is maybe common. Our bathroom is a small house constructed aside of the house. And it's a pit, just where you dug, a very like something of 2 meters. I don't know how feet, but it's 2 meters. We use meters, more than 2 meters, and then you put some kind of bridge, like 5 poles, and then you construct a kind of a shelter. So you use that one as a bathroom. But here the bathroom, you know the bathroom here. So, and then when you go to the kitchen, that's again the second thing which is common. Here in the kitchen, you just turn something and you don't even with the fire, but back to the country, to the refugees, you have 3 stones where you have to use firewood and the matchbox. You make the fire, and then you put a pan or saucepan, you warm or you boil the food. So here, you just turn like this, or you turn it, so it's automatic. So here, life is easier than into the refugee camp. You found the water. Water here, you open the tap, so the water comes. But in the refugee camp, we have to pump. That's a borehole. So that's why I'm saying there is no comparison. Actually, really, here life is very easy and very simple. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, I will talk about 2 things that I've seen a big change. When you look at health in the camp, it's actually miserable. You go in the hospital, there are no beds for the patient. Actually, it's there, but not enough. But here, whenever like my mom is sick, I just take her to the hospital and she gets medication, everything is well. Then education, on the side of education, in Uganda, I was a primary teacher, and I was teaching a class of 150 pupils. You can imagine marking like papers, grading the papers. It's very hard for those students, and they cannot understand you at all. But when I get here in America, I started schooling. We have never seen even a class beyond 20 students. That's a huge change. So basically, there are many things that I can mention that I've seen: transportation issues. You find one person walking in a camp like even more than 6 kilometers going to cultivate, to dig. But here, everything we use, the transportation basically is easy. So there are many things I can talk about, but let me end here. You have also seen the movie, and majority of you might be meeting refugees and talking, and they tell you the stories how it's not even 3% the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There is a at the end of the documentary, we don't see it today, but there is a moment where Isaiah and Jean-Pierre are having this discussion and catching up. And if I recall well, Jean-Pierre mentions that this is Christmas every day in the United States. Maybe you want to speak of that, being Christmas in the US every day.
Actually, that's one of something which impressed me and all of us in my family. So let me say that, like the Christmas is a big day, maybe as I have seen here all over the world. But in back to my place of staying, that's Changwa refugees in Uganda, where I've stayed more than 20 years. But in the preparation of Christmas and Bonane, that's the New Year, So from January, since as soon as we finish the new year bonane, we start working and saving at least 1,000. It's equivalent like $10 or something like that. You save for those two big days, because Easter is for the Christians, so they celebrate in the church but not in the houses. So you start saving. That saves is to buy a cow or a big bull, or that's to provide. That saving is that's to provide food for that day, the clothes for that day, and drinks for that day. Those are the three major things for the Christmas. You start from January as soon as you finish New Year. So as that struggle goes to all the community, like 5 families, in Africa, they have big families like mine. I have 5 more than 6, and the other one has also the same. So we gather together like 5 families or 10 families. They unite together, and then they go to buy a cow, a big cow. They butcher on a Christmas, on a Byrne, and they decide which one they will celebrate, because they are not able to celebrate both at once. So they buy bull, they butcher, they divide the meat, and they buy rice, other things for the day, as you know. But here in America, I said every day is Christmas, because meat is the food you get there at the grass stores and wherever. Soda is the things you get. But for us, you take soda on the Christmas or bonane. So it's really very excited when I was taken to the Walmart to buy food. Someone gave me a card for 100 as a gift card. But I say, I was buying food, put in the cart. I saw it's a lot. I say, where will I get money? So it was too much. So here, really, food, on Christmas, I felt what to buy, because everything was in the fridge. Meat is there, soda is there, everything. So that's why I said here everything, every day is a Christmas, because nothing you think of buying on Christmas days. Maybe
Yes.
these days, yeah.
To add on what he has said, this morning I've been talking to my friend who is in the camp in Uganda. Majority of them are worried of what they will celebrate Christmas with. But right now, a person like me, even though I don't celebrate it, I know everything is provided at home. So there's that problem of shortage of food. Not even, leave alone the meat, but even other food stuffs, they are not enough for them, because even the land that they use, where they used to cultivate crops from, it has been divided. A small land, like from where I am to the screen, there are like 3 shelters inside. How do you expect those people to have good life or have food? Thank you.
So there is definitely a drastic contrast before and now, and indeed, options are endless here in the U.S. Jean-Pierre, I had a quick chat with you, but leaving that refugee camp, so a lot of things have changed for you here in the U.S., but it also means that you left a family member behind.
Correct.
Could you speak of that?
Yes, coming here, as I said, it's a kind of a miracle. We started, if you go back, we started the resettlement process in 2014. So my brother, the same mother, the same mom, we stayed in the same village, in the same block. We started the process together. Everything was correct, but I found myself United States here, but he's still there. I don't know what's the problem. He's eligible, he has all the papers, the qualifications of being here, but I don't know what happened. I keep asking him he says, you there, you can ask and know what's going on. I don't know which office to ask, I don't know who to ask. So we have many people in the same process, but they are still in the refugee camp. They are stranded, they don't know what to do, they don't know what happened, they don't know what, so, because these are the people who are hopeless. They don't have a name. Yes, they are refugees, but they don't have a name. Because right now, I can say I have a name. That's where you see in the movie, I said I'm American. Because now I get status. In Uganda, you are not allowed for local integration. You are not allowed to go back in the country to be called Congolese or be called Ugandans, local integration. So these people, they are living without name. They are nameless, they are homeless. They don't know what to do in 20 years in the refugee camp. You say, these people will live in temporary. We say tomorrow there will be peace, I will go back. Tomorrow there will be peace. Tomorrow comes tomorrow, tomorrow comes tomorrow. So it becomes 20 years. Now they have 23 years, more than that. In the refugees, they don't know where to go. They don't know where to stay. They depend on daily survival.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, and we will exactly touch upon this issue of refugee resettlement in a moment with Mr. Purcell. In the documentary, you keep saying that you are American. So what does it mean to be American for you today, and how do you reconcile both being Congolese and American? And I see that Jean-Pierre is wearing pins with the American flag, and yesterday he had also a tie with the American flag, so I can feel the Americanness here.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. To be American, what I meant is that I was granted the status to come here to America. So I left the nameless name because I was not having a name. There was no hope of going back to my country. There was no hope of where to go. So the moment I reached here in America, I said I'm American because I said I'm going to struggle to be American. Right now, I have a green card. So, but what I meant here is that I said I'm American because I know I'm going to execute or to do the best to be at the same level as American, to obey the rule and the regulations of the country. Right now, I adopted American's job, I can say, because I know how to deal with the warehouse. I'm able to do that. Now I have American driving license. Now I'm driving the senior citizen. I'm working with the bus company in New York, in Pennsylvania. That's where I'm working. And after that, I and my wife, we are working in a home, homestay. There we are caring for the elderly. So there's a home care where I'm working. She's working nighttime. I'm driving daytime. So we are changing. We are working together. So we are time conscious, and all these things. That's what we are. We coped, and then we are really very okay with that, and then. That's what I said, I'm American, because now I thought I'm going to wear a new jacket to be a person, to have a name. Because 20 years in the refugees, you don't have a hope of going back to your country. You don't have a hope of staying in where you are to be maybe integrated. I left the country when I was 20 years old. As soon as I finished my school, the same year, they all came in. So I'm 42 years right now. So imagine 40 years, you married in a refugee camp, you get children in a refugee camp, you don't know where you came from. Like Isaiah, my brother here, he came as he was 8 years. So really, I felt that I'm American because I wear that name, I got that name. So I have the experience, my life is simple now, that's what I meant now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre.
Yes, basically when you look at someone sounding I'm American, you have seen a movie, even the children were singing, we are going to America, we are going to America, because once you land on this land here, you have a freedom. There's no kind of security issues like those people in DRC, what they are facing. Some people are sleeping in the bush. But when since I got here, actually, to assure you, nobody has even arrested me or have maybe shaken me. I have freedom. I do everything, whatever I need to do. And yeah, that's why we put on things bearing American flag and whatever. So we are so excited to be here. We love the country. That's it.
Maybe the meaning of the song you heard on the movie, the children they are singing, it means that it says, Ambia Farao nimeokoka, sitarudi nyuma, naenda America. This means, tell those people, it's kind of a political song, but tell Pharaoh that I'm leaving, I will not go back, I'm going to America. So this means tell those people who are causing trouble in my country, I will not go back, I'm going to America. I'm saved. Nimeokoka, I'm saved now. Because IOM, UNHCR, Americans, whatever, they saved those children, saved their family of the children who are singing that tell those people behind, I will not go back. I'm going in front, they are saved. That's what the meaning of the song.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre and Isaiah. I would like to turn to Grégoire right now. And first, Grégoire, congratulations and thank you for such a beautiful and well-produced documentary capturing the stories of Jean-Pierre, his family, and Isaiah from Uganda to the U.S. First, maybe could you tell us why did you choose to make this documentary? And if you could take us quickly through the filming and the production phase. And I know it was quite difficult and intense.
Yes. So I'm sorry first for my English because it's something very bad. So I'm gonna try to be quick. I decided to do this movie because there is a lot of documentaries, films, reports about migration issues, and I think most of the time this is sad stories showing a big suffering, and obviously suffering is part of refugees' life. But I tried to find a way to tell to talk about migration issues in a positive way. So resettlement, relocations appeared like as evidence to tell this story in a positive way. And one of my main goal was to do a movie which could be watched by children. So I'm so sorry you didn't see the movie, you have only seen a short part. But with these two guys, my two friends, I think the story is really positive, and that was my main goal.
I confirm, it was a very positive documentary. So while filming this documentary, Grégoire, you traveled back and forth to Uganda and here to the US, different parts of the US. And I'm sure that you have witnessed things that you were not expecting or you were not prepared for, not only as a filmmaker, but as an individual, as a human being. Maybe could you speak of that?
There is a lot, but the principal one is, you know, I'm used to filming in Africa for a long time. And during this shooting, it took a long time with Isaiah and Jean-Pierre. And I was, every day, I would say, surprised by their dignity. Each time they had to face a new problem, a new stage, a new challenge, all the time they kept dignity. And to me, to observe, for me, like an observer, this was something incredible.
So I know that, Grégoire, you have to leave because you have to head to the airport, but very quickly, a final question, and that is addressed to the three of you. Most likely, you've created that strong bond as you were filming and going through this production. How would you describe your relationship today, and how do you keep in touch? If you can talk a little bit of that.
To me, I can say, actually, as he was doing the documentary, filming us, we had to create, we know we are now brothers, we have a relationship, and like now I consider him as my counselor. Whenever I get like a problem, I just shoot him an email, I have this challenge, how can I go through this? So you can really see that there is relationship, we understand one another together with the Jean-Pierre. For Jean-Pierre, as you have seen the movie, we are even from the same country. We have been living in a camp for 20 years together, so we have that kind of brotherhood in us.
Do you want to say something, Jean-Pierre?
Yes. When I look at Grégoire, I look at him as a brother. When it comes to my family, when Grégoire comes to my family, they see Grégoire as kind of an angel to the family. Because when he came at my house for the first time, my mom, my wife, my children were excited, and they said, "Is this one coming to take us to America?" What could be the answer to me? So I said, yes. So Grégoire, my family looks Grégoire like an angel from God sent to my family to bring him back, to bring him, made to serve the family from, to get the family from the deep, in the fire, in the hot water, to the situation where they are. So to me, as a Jean-Pierre individual, I look at Gregoire as a very closer brother to me.
So a friend, a brother, an angel. Grégoire, would you like to add a few words to
I
that?
just feel a bit confused to hear that. Thank you very much, my friend. But you know, you have to watch this movie because by discovering these two guys, we can see something like exemplary, you know. And the first word who came to me is dignity and courage. So thank you for both of you for your collaboration, and I'm very glad to be your friend now.
Before letting you go, Grégoire, I have a final question. I imagine that you have hours of footage shot in Uganda and here in the US, and I'm curious to know what are the images that didn't make the final cut that you would have liked people to see and watch?
There is a lot. I have done a lot of interviews back in Uganda in the settlement, and you know, I could have done a 3 hours movie, but it was impossible. Nobody would have watched it. So I had to make some choices. And I would have liked to show everybody few of these interviews of people living with nothing, cutting from their roots, their origins, but never complaining. And this is very impressive. You know, I would have liked to show everybody that these people, these refugees, even when they facing a very deep distress, they never complain. And this is something I would have liked to show everybody.
Thank you, Grégoire. And because you know that you did not book a one-way ticket to the US, I will let you go and make your way to the airport. Thank you so much. So before, I will turn to Mr. James Purcell right now, and before getting into technical questions more about the refugee resettlement in the U.S., and also getting a chance to discuss about the book. Mr. Purcell, would you like to share a few words about the documentary that we just watched?
Yes, thank you. My heart is warmed when I watch this movie, because it demonstrates a central principle of my own humanitarian philosophy: migration with dignity. When I think of the word dignity, New York, the UN, my mind is brought back to 1948, when Eleanor Roosevelt came to the UN and sat down with all the other governments. And they negotiated something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They created a new order of justice and human rights based on the inherent dignity of every person. Let me say that again. The inherent dignity of every person. Global institutions were created up here in New York, and they helped govern the liberal democratic order that made the world livable for the next 70 years. Mrs. Roosevelt was guided during her discussions here by the fellow named George Warren. He sat beside her and was her right-hand person. George Warren also was instrumental here in New York in the establishment of the UN High Commission for Refugees. And he was the head of the American delegation that attended a conference in Brussels that created something called PICME, the Provisional Intergovernmental Committee for the Movement of Migrants in Europe. So he's very important in our IOM legacy. This movie showing human dignity is important to me because I've seen this process played out thousands of times over the year. When I created, during the Carter administration, the U.S. resettlement program following the end of the Vietnam War, I helped resettle, through our non-governmental organizations and many, many partners, over 3.5 million refugees in the United States. This was done through global humanitarian cooperation, a whole range of governments, NGOs, private partners, international organizations. The accomplishments of that era would not have been possible without global cooperation. Behind all the numbers I've just cited are individuals, like Isaiah and Jean-Pierre. But as I watch this movie, I'm reminded our work is not yet finished.
Thank you, Mr. Purcell. And indeed, if Jean-Pierre and Isaiah are here today, it's thanks to you and the work you accomplished in the 1980s. You set up the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program in 1980, as you said, under President Jimmy Carter. And then you were later named the official director of the program by President Ronald Reagan. Maybe could you guide us quickly through the resettlement process of refugees who are come to the U.S.? There were a lot of talk and discussion in the media as of recently. So maybe could you do that for us, please?
Let me introduce this by giving a little of the background. 1979, Vietnam War had ended. The American troops had come home. Our country was depressed. You remember how poorly our military soldiers were received as they came back home. We heard that there were remaining in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos many millions of people, and all of the governments had pulled out. President Carter decided we would, on behalf of the Americans, would establish a rescue organization. I was brought in as the acting director of that organization. And I had to do a number of things. We went to a conference in Geneva and we agreed that we would resettle 168,000 refugees in our country the next year. I had to, then later, when I came back to Washington, I found that our capacity to do resettlement was very limited. So I called all of the domestic refugee resettlement organizations in our country to a conference in Coolfont, West Virginia. And we sat down there for 3 days and carved out everything the NGOs would have to do to resettle a refugee. That's the procedures for vetting, for documentation and processing. We worked with UNHCR to look at in the camp who was, and we worked according to their durable solution priorities. First, repatriation. Second, regional settlement. And when those were not possible, we went to third country. When we went to third country, we had to document and select those that went to each country. So that was done in collaboration with UNHCR and IOM. There are many processes for meeting up with refugees, helping them with housing, with medical, getting the kids in school, helping them to get jobs, to become sustainable as quickly as possible, but many, many procedures. There was one time in 1982, it got so complicated, so many interacting and revolving pieces, the Congress was about ready to stop the resettlement program. They felt that we weren't able to manage it. And I told them that I would establish something called a case manager. Now that's in the film when you see the whole thing. The case manager helped with all of these complicated procedures with each refugee. But we got, as I said, we've resettled a lot. The point I wanted to leave you with on this point is that all of these procedures were documented and worked on prior to departure, before anybody left the camp or as soon as they arrived. We knew who these people were. We knew as much as we could about their situation. We had NGOs who were prepared to receive them, and compared to some of the later procedures that are used for people coming into this country, we knew who they were. This was the safest migration possible.
Thank you. A lot of the history of the refugee program and resettlement to the U.S. is in this book, We Are in Danger, Who Will Help Us? And so, Mr. Purcell, in your book, you also call the years from 1979 to 1989 the refugee decade. And you call the current era that started in 2011 the Syrian refugee era. How would you call or describe the new decade that is about to start, 2020?
Okay. Let me talk just a little bit about Syria. I believe that was a dividing point. Up until that time, the global humanitarian cooperation strategy had pretty much governed the actions. But Syria was a dividing point. It was handled, in my estimation, very, very poorly, poorly planned, poorly executed. A major development in 2015, some of the younger Syrian refugees in camps throughout the region decided that they couldn't take it there anymore. So they wanted to leave. They made a beeline for Europe, for Germany, Sweden, France, whatnot. I made a trip to the region then, and I said, look, the regime to follow is, we had in the global humanitarian cooperation strategy, was refugee resettlement. We've got to know who these people are. We've got to process them. We've got to know that they are qualified for resettlement. But that advice was rejected. We saw over 800,000 political asylum applicants going into Europe with all of the problems that they produced, and they were massive. I think the reaction of many governments was that the international community did not know how to safely resettle refugees and migrants, and they reacted. I saw recently an article by Ann Applebaum in the Washington Post, who I follow. She said the reaction to the negative experience in Syria has produced a lot of losses. She says there's been a global refugee backlash, and I believe that's true, and we're experiencing that right now. She said there's been declines in the liberal democratic order, and I think that's true. In transnational cooperation, she went on to say that because of the negative reaction to that experience, we've lost our commitment to genocide protection. We've lost our consciousness of the responsibility to protect. We're really shy on our commitment to peacekeeping and peacemaking anymore. But more than anything else, she said, we have lost our sense of empathy. So if I were to describe the new decade starting with 2020, I would say it's with governments who see their national self-interest, their national interest as national self-interest or removal of themselves from the global scene. And I think that's dangerous. Let me read you a piece I got out of the Washington Post. When I was on the train coming up here, we were looking at the major stories of 2019. One of them is the immigration wars. I think the story of the 2010 is the flood of refugees and migrants that sparked nationalistic movements across the globe, said Dan Seals. It is a contest between those who have lost their homes and those who feel their homes are at risk. One of my close colleagues wrote me an email right before I left. He's in Mali. He said, Jim, this is where things are real. Hundreds of thousands of refugees, IDPs, and migrants of all kinds here in Mali. And the poorest of the poor local population, accept them without a grumble and share all they have, including rapidly dwindling water resources. From here, our rich country seems awfully far away and remarkably uncaring. And I think that's the decade we're going into.
Thank you for this, Mr. Purcell. And in your book, you also warn about ongoing humanitarian crisis and the challenges the U.S. and the world face in not addressing them adequately. You speak of a test of civilization. Would you like to elaborate on this test of civilization?
Michael Mandelbaum, eminent political scientist, says, there's nothing in our experience that has prepared us for what is going on now. The meltdown of an increasing number of states all at the same time in a globalized world. And he says, in that conundrum, inept dictators like Saddam and Assad plunder resources, and remaining citizens are left to look after themselves. The natural reaction is to flee, and we've seen that over and over. The trouble is that the global volume of crisis victims is accelerating exponentially, and the places offering safety and opportunity are diminishing at about the same speed. The result is, I think, a battered humanitarian system. Although I think we have a number of great organizations. Governments are not stepping up to support them the way they should. Caring societies cannot hide from these cruelties. We've got to stand up and help to address the problems. We cannot let fears blind us to the need to continue to allow deserving migrants and refugees to transit and to come into our countries. I have a section in my book, and I hope you'll read it. I'm going to read you this last paragraph. Civilization's new test is whether we can free the world's conscience from the bonds that have been used to tie it down, and once freed, to stir our hearts and minds to regain a sense of moral outrage, purpose, and resolve, to face its responsibilities squarely, no longer to look away, but to act.
We will be going through a final question before opening to Q&As and comments. So, Mr. Purcell, maybe a little bit of help from people in this room. What people in this room can do to ensure countries are up to the humanitarian challenges around the world and make sure that countries around the world keep offering and increase their offer of durable solution to those who have fled violence, conflict, and persecution?
Well, I personally believe that we're in a hole right now, and it will take reinvigorating leadership at all levels to change directions. We did it after World War II. We did it after Vietnam. Why not now? We need leaders with vision and a sense of empathy. We need energetic governments to step forward to lead the global humanitarian system. We need a spark plug government like the U was in earlier years to guide our allies, to work with our allies to guide the humanitarian system. When I took over the refugee job, I had great role models. I had Jimmy Carter and I had Ronald Reagan. When I went to Geneva in the Boat People Conference, I made a proposal that we would resettle, say, maybe 10,000 a month, more than any other government had ever done in 1 year. Jimmy Carter said, that's not enough. And he, right at the conference, increased that to 14,000. Ronald Reagan, I have a quote from him in my book, and I hope you'll see it right at the beginning. Before he was elected in 1980, when he was nominated in Detroit, he gave his acceptance speech, then he closed his book. And let me read you just a little bit of what he said. Because I find it so inspiring. I have thought of something that is not part of my speech, and I'm worried over whether I should do it. Can we doubt that only a divine providence placed this land, this island of freedom, here as a refuge for all those people in the world who yearn to breathe freely? Jews and Christians enduring persecution from behind the Iron Curtain, the boat people of Southeast Asia, of Cuba, of Haiti, the victims of drought and famine in Africa, the freedom fighters of Afghanistan. And he later went on to describe others, and he said, but I'm going to do something that I didn't think I'd ever do. I'm going to pause for a word of silent prayer for these people. And he did. We don't have that kind of leadership anymore. I've looked at some of the atrocious policies coming out of my own government, and I'm horrified. Recently, I read of a proposal to require local and state sign-off on every resettlement. What that's produced has been 0 resettlements in October. Resettlement is dying out. I have joined with other former heads of the U.S. refugee program to take this issue to court. We're saying that this executive order is illegal, and we're asking the court to stop it. I've watched as this administration has attempted to destroy the refugee program in the State Department by making it a security issue and moving it over to the Department of Homeland Security. I have fought that with other former directors of the program, and we have defeated it in the U.S. Congress. So people have got to stand up. We've got to start making our views known that things are happening that are terrible. They're atrocious, and we don't agree with them. And we've got to start making our voices heard. And I think we've got to become aggressive as humanitarians.
Thank you, Mr. Purcell. We will now open it to question and answers, and also for whoever wants to make a quick comment. So a few remarks. I will ask you to introduce yourself and ask your question. Please. You can, yes.
Thank you very much. I am the permanent representative of Costa Rica to the UN. And I've been sitting here for this intense 2 hours of very, very moving manifestations and reflections and histories, and I've been moved. I've been moved by what has been mentioned and shown here. I've been moved by the just finished presentation by Mr. Purcell. And well, I had some presentation to read in this occasion, but of course I will not read it because what has been said is more than sufficient. Yes, 10,000 people a year was not enough, as said to President Carter 40 years ago. Perhaps 10,000 is not enough. Let me tell you that in Costa Rica, we received in the last 2 years 70,000 requests of refugee status from people in the region wanting to move to our country, which has been, well, for a long time, a land of reception of refugees and of other migrants, perhaps due to its stability and its geographical situation. I was very much surprised because this figure I didn't know. I guess there was something like this, but not in this circumstance, in this amount. The migrant and refugee population in Costa Rica accounts for more than 10% of the total population of the country nowadays. It's the highest one in Latin America, 10.5. And guess how much the migrant population adds to our GDP? 11.9%. All these people come to help us, to help in our economy. We have the challenge to integrate them into the economy, to give them as much and as many rights as the rest of the population has. And they will pull more and more and more people. people that leave home, people that leave families, people, yes, as the ambassador of Ireland was mentioning, people that want to go back and die at their homeland. But meanwhile, they are serving us. Our president is currently in Geneva, has been there for the last 3 days, participating in the refugee conference taking place there, committing the country once more to this quest, and yes, asking the international community to share with us and with all the countries of reception that responsibility. We're looking forward for that, and we certainly have been very, very moved with this human-centered approach has been mentioned and explained here today. Thank you.
You speak close enough to the microphone, so whatever you're saying is captured on the webcast. You want to make a comment? Oh my gosh.
Thank you very much from the Permanent Mission of Mexico here at the UN, and thank you to IOM and others for organizing and Happy Migrants Day. Thank you also to the panelists. From our perspective, today's important because it helps us go beyond the statistics and put a human face on a global phenomenon. But at the same time, it's a day of certain frustration because of what we see as a disconnect globally between public policy and data and evidence. We see a tendency of public policy to be based on perceptions rather than evidence. But we heard some of the numbers today. Migrants represent 3.5% of the global population, but globally produce almost 9% of the world's wealth, $6.7 trillion. So it's a day where we want to reaffirm the call to have a debate, but based on evidence and data, and to congratulate the good work that IOM does there. Second, to comment a bit on what was said with regards to the need to revamp the humanitarian system. Let's also remember that if we have 277 million migrants worldwide and only 71 million are forcefully displaced, whether as IDPs, asylum seekers, or refugees, that means that, as Ashraf mentioned, the majority do not fall into that category. And so the challenge that we continue to have is to ensure that everyone, regardless of their migration status, is treated with safety and dignity. So our call is to ensure that the Global Compact for Refugees and the Global Compact for Migration are indeed seen as complementary instruments, and that we continue to have a dialogue that goes deeper into the best practices and cooperation, because quite simply, migration is by definition an international phenomenon. So the question is not whether a country can manage it on their own or not, it's how effectively will you cooperate with the rest of the sovereign states to effectively manage migration. So thank you again, and congratulations to all of the panelists.
Thank you, and thank you for these key figures that you just provided. Is there anyone else? Maybe we have time for one quick question, a quick comment before going into the next session. Here. Yes, you're on.
It's on. So my name is Paulina. I'm not connected to United Nations, but I am an immigrant, and I'm a young filmmaker. As a documentarian, I saw your perspective. However, I have a question. How would you see now the world is going to the step of more digital storytelling and a digital world? how would you see this, the steps of fighting for freedom, for more dignified vision of immigrants and of, generally speaking, this fusion of mixture of different cultures in different ways, which is immigration is a part of it. How do you envision it to be in the future as a tool of filmmaking, and in how many percentage you think it is more effective? So that's the question is for me important because I'm a filmmaker and I want to influence the world. My mother is PhD psychologist, and I've been living with her in scientific group to 40 countries, and I know the different perspectives. As a filmmaker, to me, is important to make sure that my movies are understandable to all cultures, all perspectives. What suggestion would you give me to influence in a way that I respect your vision that we have to fight, but I think it's more into influencing people psychologically so that they will more peacefully find a solution of not fighting, but rather more having a united conclusion of here, this is how it works better for everyone. What would you suggest me, and what do you think how it can work with filmmaking?
I am afraid that the best person to answer that question was Grégoire, who left as a filmmaker, and I would not want to mislead you with any answer here. However, we have a session right now coming up on the depiction of migrants and refugees in the media, and that might be answer your question partially at least.
I want to hear his. Do you hear me? Yeah. I want to hear his opinion of as a person who is in politics, very much involved in politics since.
To Mr. Purcell?
Yes.
You want to hear?
So much involved in politics, so like historically and back in times. How do you see our future in terms of transition in politics in media, not in the ways of talking back and forth to influence politics, but in more general, how do you see the media?
The world needs to know what's happening. And however we can communicate it, I think we're going into a digital world, and we need to use whatever devices, techniques, capacities that exist. I do believe that so much of the destruction that has occurred recently is because we have uninformed publics, and we've got to educate. We've got to inform people what's going on in various countries and what activities or protections they can provide as individuals and as societies. But I am of the mind that the world citizens have got to be much more involved. And if they're digitalized, so be it. Go with it. And if any other technique works, I agree with that as well.
Thank you. We have to wrap up this panel. Apologize. We have to move on. We're already behind schedule. So I would like to thank the panelists, Jean-Pierre, Isaiah, and Mr. James Purcell. We did not watch the entire movie. However, in the bios, you have the contact information of Grégoire, and you can also take contact with our staff, Abdi and Rahma. They will be able to provide you a link if you want to watch the full version and even organize a screening. And you also have a one-pager on your table about the book, We Are in Danger, Who Will Help Us, by Mr. James Purcell. So thank you so much. We are about to move on to our final session with Paola Pace. You want to sit next to me? You want to sit here? You staying with us? Or you leaving? staying? Yeah, you staying here? You can stay here or there. I think we have enough time. We have 45 minutes, so it's enough, right? It's good. We're good, right? Right. So we're moving on to the final, right? Yes, the final. Can you take quickly the introduction I will make? Yes. Is there anything I should know? At the end, just Chef said we're going to put the link on our website. So. Okay. All right, closing remarks. So are we ready to keep moving? All right. First, there were images of women, men, children fleeing Syria by boat, by feet, and by bus. Some were also fleeing from Iraq and Afghanistan. Then there was the gut-wrenching photograph of the dead body of Syrian toddler Alan Kurdi, washed off the shores of Bodrum in Turkey. Around the same time, boats filled with African migrants desperately trying to reach Europe started to make headlines until CNN broke the story about African migrants being sold into slavery while detained in Libya. The story, which made headlines for days, raised a crucial question. Have migrants become a mere commodity deprived of their inherent human rights? While migration policies can be questioned and smugglers can be blamed to making profit out of vulnerable and desperate migrants, the depiction of migrants in the media plays a key role in the perception and treatment of migrants. Besides, migration is a complex phenomenon that goes beyond shocking images and catchy sound bites. Given the fundamental role the media play in shaping narratives and forming public opinions, the International Organization for Migration believes that it is crucial that journalists have the knowledge and skills to report on migration while adopting an evidence and human rights-based approach. Paula Passe, here with me, is the Deputy Chief of Mission of IOM in Tunisia. She is also the Manager of Regional Programs, and she will introduce today a trainer's guide for media coverage on migration.
Thank you very much, Eger, and thank you to everybody. I know you are quite tired, and I see someone also leaving, some of you leaving the room. Please don't leave without a copy of the guide. You will find them in a USB stick made in Tunisia from olive tree wood. It's an honor and a privilege to address this gathering today to launch the guide for journalists on media coverage on migration that is based on evidence and human rights, and if you like, international law more broadly. If one search, and we can do an experiment, if you take your phone, your tablets, your computer in front of you, and you type the word migrants, and you click on images, what you're going to see are vessels, are tears, are people marching, are tragedies, crises. You won't see the story of Isaiah, the story of Jean-Pierre. You won't see the story, the beautiful verses of Ola. You won't see the reality of migration nowadays. That's what we see. Migration is much more complex than shocking images of migrants cramped into overcrowded vessels, and is a difficult phenomenon for journalists, and is a difficult phenomenon for many to report on. We will see it in a minute, but irregular migration is the form of migration which dominates current debate, while, as a number of us have said today, the majority of migration nowadays is regular. And also, when we talk about irregular migration, the majority of irregular migration is about overstaying, is not about irregular movements. These are the facts. Myths and stereotypes are something else. Given the media's fundamental role in shaping narrative and forming public opinion, it's critical that journalists have the knowledge and the skill to report on migration, knowing the evidence, knowing the facts, and knowing international law. Media can play a fantastic role. That's our filmmaker was asking, what's our role? And I can think of a number of stories that actually are on the positive side. When the media got involved in some migration cases, for example, the case of a medical doctor that emigrated from Germany to Australia with his family, and at a certain point integrated in the society, decided to ask for permanent residency. This permanent residency was denied because this child lives with Down syndrome. So the family was seen as a burden on the society, although this doctor was actually exercising in the Victoria State in a rural area where doctors with this specialization were not to be found. So where is the balance? And the media got very much involved. The New York Times wrote an article on the historians, and many other journalists got involved in this story. And he lost the case before the courts. He lost the possibility to plead his cause, but then because of all the blaming and shaming and the movement of the public opinion, also thanks to the media, the immigration authorities of the Victoria State at the time decided to grant to this family permanent residency. So you can see the media can play a fundamental role, not only in shaping public opinion, but really to make a difference in people's lives. But they can do so only if they are really armed with facts and with evidence. So that's why we felt as IOM that it was important to work with the media, with filmmaker, for example, but also the written press, the social media, and so on and so forth, with radios, to shape this public opinion, to change the narrative around migration. And that's how we started a number of training of trainers in various countries, for example, in Morocco, where there's a master in media migration that was created thanks to the engagement of a number of journalists and the ZIC, a training institution for journalists based in Rabat, but also a number of trainings that took place in Tunisia, took place with Libyan journalists, Algerian journalists, and other journalists based in North Africa. And because we got more and more requests from media houses on tools in order to continue this work of training journalists on migration coverage that is based on evidence and international law, we decided to come up with a toolkit designed by journalists for journalists. So I wrote this manual together with Thierry Leclerc, a senior reporter that has worked on migration issues for a number of years. And we really hope that this manual can be used, this guide can be used by more and more people in order to shape the migration narrative. It has been already published in French and in Arabic, and today we are launching its English version. So you'll find the English version in this USB stick before leaving.
And so hopefully with this manual, we'll be able also to dispel some of the most common stereotypes that we hear about migrants and migration. And one of them is immigrants, so migrants take jobs away from the natives.
Exactly. This is one of the stereotypes, but the facts are different. We have already said it before. Migrants represent 3.5% of the population in 2019, and they bring wealth. But it's fitting to be launching this manual in the United States, a country that has benefited more than any other from its historically liberal migration policy. We have heard about it before. A recent American study found that immigrants and the children of immigrants founded 45% of U.S. Fortune 500 companies, amassing $6.1 trillion in annual revenue in 2018. A Citigroup and Oxford University report found that 2/3 of U.S. GDP expansion since 2011 was directly attributable to migration. The study also noted the immigrants were more than twice as likely to come up with a patented invention or to win an Academy Award or Nobel Prize. Foreign students are far more likely to be in the fields like computer science and so on and so forth. Overall, these programs have the highest percentage of international students. It's not an exaggeration to say that American rise to a global superpower would not have been possible without migration. If we think about the 5 biggest immigration countries in the world, the US being the first one, followed by countries like Germany, Saudi Arabia, the UK, these are the richest countries in the world, also thanks to migrants. This is a fact. Globally, migrants account, we said, to 3.5% of the population, but bring much more to the countries they go to and to their country of origin. Empirical microeconomic evidence demonstrate the positive impact of migration on host economies, but way beyond the economics, also as a social migration can have a very strong social and cultural impact on societies. Migration is associated with significantly increased per capita GDP, reduced unemployment, and improvement in the balance of public finances. In the past 5 years, 570,000 out of the total 6 million Italian firms, or 9.4%, were created by immigrants. So the reality, immigrants bring much more to the country of destination than what they take from those countries. And this is not only true for high or middle-income countries. A recent study in low-income countries also demonstrated the advantage to receive newcomers in the society. So it's very important that we look into that as well. The estimated contribution of immigrants to GDP varied from about 1% in Ghana to 19% in Côte d'Ivoire. So these are all important facts.
There is also another stereotype that we've heard here in the US and also in European countries as of lately, is that migrants are a burden on health systems, and maybe you could provide us with some facts on this as well.
For sure. Migrants, first of all, don't choose the country of destination on the basis of the health system. That's another fact. But this is not what people often think. And actually, often they underutilize the health system. The majority of the migrants are young, are fitter. Actually, mostly the healthy migrant phenomenon is as such as when someone immigrates to a country, often has a health status that is higher compared to the health status of someone of the same age group or social economic status. But although the health status can deteriorate if the person then has, for example, a diploma that is not recognized or has to accept a job that is degrading and difficult in sector of the economy that put the health of the person at stake, or can't find the housing, so has to live in an overcrowded place, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that migrants often underutilize health services, let alone the fact that there are a lot of health professionals who are migrants. And we have done, for example, a study in Southern Africa. IOM has done a study some years back demonstrating that excluding migrants from the health system would cost 3 times more than including them. That's a reality. Exclusion is costly from a public health perspective, from an economic perspective, and from a human rights perspective.
Thank you, Paola, for these facts and figures.
Thank you, Adrian. And maybe we can show you a little bit what this manual is about. So here you have for display a few copies of the French version, and then don't leave without the English version with you. We will soon publish also the Arabic one. We are proofreading it again. Next. I would like to quote Richard Kapuscinski, who is a journalist, and who said some 11 years ago something that is very true. In the 21st century, we will encounter the other in ways with a frequency that could never have previously been imagined. Will this result in coming together in mutual respect or an unleashing of base prejudice? This is something that is food for thought, makes us reflect on the fact that we have much more in common than what divides us, but there's a general perception that the other, those we encounter, is actually someone who can threaten us. Next. We have talked before about the Global Compact, and in its guiding principle, the Global Compact makes reference to the fact that we also must provide all our citizens, or if you like, all those in our communities, with access to objective, evidence-based, clear information about the benefits and challenges of migration. So we should be able to have a migration narrative that is based on facts. We said that the theme of the International Migrants Day this year, in 2019, is about social inclusion. And improving the narrative of migration can have a good impact on social cohesion in communities. There's a price that can be paid if there's exclusion in our community, resulting in weakened social cohesion. Human capital can be affected. We can see increase in violence. But if, on the contrary, we work on what makes us more similar than what divides us, we can have richer society in all sense. So that's why this guide looks into evidence, into international law, and into how to report on migration based on all this. Looking at the table of content, you will see there are a number of modules. We start with an introduction. First of all, I wanted to tell you that we have two kinds of guides, one for trainers. So if you work in media outlets and you'd like to train other journalists, you can do so using this guide. And please give us feedback, and if you would like to add content, we would like to see it also translated into other languages and improved along the way. It's a living document, so we hope to be able to publish more editions. So the one for trainers contains also a template agenda, for example, pre and post training questionnaire exercises, as well as the one for journalists has some facts. So we start with some statistics, some maps that shows you what is migration today in 2019, and we also go a bit through the history. Then we have an entire module on terminology. This is quite a complex issue, but I think it's a fascinating one. We have heard different words, and there are many different organizations, international organizations, civil society, government themselves, who do work on this topic. So many are the words that are utilized nowadays. But there are some right and wrongs, or do and don'ts, that we should be conscious about. Given this diverse nature of those involved in migration, we do hear words like, for example, illegal migrants, which is certainly not a word that should be used, not only because there's a General Assembly resolution of 1975 asking all member states and the international community not to use this word, but because we know action can be legal, people never are. And if we look at the phenomenon migration, we can have internal migration, we can have international migration, we can have voluntary migration, forced migration, and all the gray areas in between. If we look at the statistic, migration nowadays is mostly about labor migration, is mostly about family reunification, it's mostly about international studying, while 10% of international migration nowadays is about forced migration, is about refugees. If we look at the actors of migration, migrants is an encompassing word that means all those who have changed their habitual place of residence, depending, and then the status of the person can change. You can have a migrant worker, you can have asylum seeker, you can have international students, family members in a regular, irregular situation, you can have asylum seeker and refugees. You might have an asylum seeker whose claim for asylum is rejected, but not because of that the person becomes in a irregular situation, because maybe the person entered the country as a student, so remains with a study permit, or might not be entitled to refugee status, might obtain a residence permit on humanitarian ground or other grounds. So the situation is very complex. There are not two categories of people. There are not the good or the bad. And the word migrant is also used under international law, health law specifically. A resolution of the World Health Assembly of 2008 on the health of migrants uses the word migrant to include all those who migrate nowadays. And this, the word migrant worker, for example, that is not very used. We hear or we read all the time economic migrants. Economic migrants is not a legal term, while migrant worker is. And there are 3 treaties, one of 1949, so 2 years before the adoption of the Refugee Convention from the ILO, another one from 1975, again, a labor instrument, labor law instrument, and also the Migrant Worker Convention of 1990 that use the term migrant workers. And today, December 18, we are celebrating International Migrant Day. December 18 is an important date because it's the date of adoption of the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. Of the 272 million of international migrants today, 164 million are migrant workers, followed by family members, by international students, and obviously also by asylum seekers and refugees, who are certainly a particular vulnerable group of migrants because they lost the protection of the country of origin or they can't avail themselves of such protection. So the debate on words is not theoretical and is definitely not a formal debate because words matter as every human being matters. So every migrant counts, and we have to be careful not to continue perpetrating these stereotypes or this criminalization of migration and migrants themselves. We also looked in the manual to the picture factory. Many are the pictures, we talked about Alan Kurdi before, but many are the pictures we can find on the media. The second one is a picture in Djibouti of migrants trying to stay connected with the family left behind. But we could also talk about something else than irregular migration. We could talk about how migration can be transformative for a community, how migrants can really enrich a society. There are many professional challenges for media outlets nowadays. So certainly it's important to look also at ethical aspects, issues related to informed consent, issues related to do not harm first. I've been confronted sometimes to journalists who absolutely wanted to cover a story with the risk to putting at risk the person in front of them. Taking a picture or putting the name of a victim of trafficking of on a newspaper can be very risky for the person. IOM had to evacuate the victim of trafficking once because the journalist had decided to put her face and their name on a public newspaper. So do not harm is the first principle. And it's also important that migrants, those who don't vote and who don't stand for election before they have this right to vote or because they become permanent residents or nationals, depending on the country, it's important that migrants have their voices. It's also important that the media outlets are diverse and can be able to represent the variety and the diversity in a specific country. So, for example, this is a campaign that IOM has for quite a while now. I am a migrant campaign that encourages migrants to tell their story, to tell the beauty and the diversity, the complexity of every person's life. So we have the story of this lady on the left who feels she manages to navigate between two societies and to take the best of the two worlds. Or we also see another professional, another migrant worker who actually is from Romania and lives in Libya. When on the media we see Libya and we talk about migration, there's always about like the focus is on detention. But we know that Libya, since the 60s, is a big immigration country. It's one of the two biggest immigration countries in the African continent. 12% of its population is made of migrants. And 1% of these migrants are unfortunate and they shouldn't be in detention center, but 11% of them are actually working, even now, even during the war and they are contributing to the Libyan society. And what these health workers says, I will never forget how people are kind to me. So it's important that we do reflect on the complexity of migration nowadays. Yes, immigration detention has to be eliminated. We know it, but migration is so much more complex. Another issue is certainly media coverage of trafficking. Trafficking is a crime against a person, is an abusive form of migration. It can happen within the border of a country or across border. As now, even when it happens transnationally, not necessarily it has to do with irregular migration. You can have people emigrating with an entertainment visa, thinking that they go and they will find a great job as artists somewhere else, and then they are exploited. So it's important for journalists to be very conscious of the complexity of the crime of trafficking and not to misrepresent it. This is, for example, the cover of the Courrier International. The journalist in this case wanted to narrate a story of trafficking, but then if you read the subtitle on the bottom and on your left side, they talk about smuggling. So there's a confusion between the two crimes. Mm-hmm. And also, if you look at the cover, you see a woman who looks more depressive, maybe, than anything else. Fortunately, she's an actress. She's not a real victim of trafficking. Certainly would not be good, would not be in the interest of the person to have the picture of a victim of trafficking, a real victim of trafficking, on a newspaper. So all these needs to come to our mind when, as reporters, if some of you work in media outlet, you decide to cover a trafficking story. And then the last part of this guide is on recommendation, written by journalists, Thierry Leclerc, Saledin, Massinissa, a number of journalists from all over the world, from France, from Algeria, from Morocco, from other places, who came together to write some of the rules that should guide the profession. And among these rules is also not to focus on sensationalism, not on stereotypes, and to really be conscious of the role the media can play, in good and bad. And so I invite you to go more in depth in that. And I would also like you to tell you that next week in Tunis, in a 19th century historical building in Carthage, 40 journalists and regulatory bodies from 15 countries and 4 continents came together, gathered by IOM Tunisia, to discuss, to draft an ethical charter on migration coverage. They wanted to do so because they really want to engage in a different migration coverage. So we're really proud to see them moving ahead without us, with our support, and we really hope that one day we will have a different narrative. But it's also important not only to work with the media, it's also important to work with the general public to make sure that our children, the next generation, will have this critical thinking. And when they watch, they listen, they can really analyze the facts or the stereotypes they hear or they see. The next step would be for us maybe to look into online training tools. We are looking into the possibility of partnering with a Tunisian university and to develop an online toolkit so more media houses can benefit from this training. And then we hope to see these journalists finalizing and translating in different languages these ethical charters. This ethical charter, and possibly adapting it and adopting it at national level. And then we hope to see more and more network of journalists coming together, covering migration from different perspectives, looking at country of origin, destination, transit, looking at migrants, giving migrants voice, and telling different stories. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Paola. We would like to give a chance to the people in this room to ask their questions or make a comment in regard of this topic. Has anyone something to say, a question to ask? Well, then I will take a chance and maybe make a quick comment. I was myself a former journalist, and I'm now more in charge of communications and media for international organization. And what I've noticed is when journalists come to us, and I hope that journalists, if there is any in the room who are watching, there is a huge interest for people who are forcibly displaced and cross-border versus people who are forcibly displaced but are internally displaced person and are displaced inside of the country. And I'm more speaking here of international media coverage. And I think this is something also to keep in mind as international reporters, to look also at people that are displaced inside of their country. And also I think there is a lack of emphasis on host communities that are welcoming internally displaced persons, but also IDPs, and there is a lot of stories, including positive stories, on the role of host communities. That's what I wanted to underline. If still no one has something to say. Yes.
Do you hear me? Yeah. So you mentioned people who immigrate illegally and legally. So have you made a research of what is your opinion on people who are international students and then they want to immigrate because of many different reasons? And what would be your opinion on that and information that you can give me so I can later make a documentary about it?
Thank you for the good question. Actually, 4.8 million are international students nowadays. And this is a good question because some people enter a country as international students and then they would like to transition into migrant workers, having the possibility to stay in the country where they studied beyond their study. And sometimes this is not really possible because they don't manage, they would have to go back to their country of origin, then retry to emigrate, and it might be very complicated. So that's why you have some people who overstay. And it's even more complex because in certain countries, international students cannot work while they study, and maybe they don't have the means. The family left behind cannot send enough money for them to go through their studying year. And so they found themselves with the necessity to work, but they cannot work in the formal sector because they are not allowed to, and they risk to get into exploitative situation. That's a big issue. Some countries have moved ahead, changing their policy in this sense, giving the chance to international students to work during the study if they have to, and to be able to remain in the country transitioning smoothly after they study. So there are best practices out there. They are not everywhere. So more needs to be done, and it would be great to see a movie on that. Sure.
Thank you. Well, yes, Jean-Pierre, go ahead.
Maybe it's not to what said. I want to get this chance to say maybe it's about the movie. Maybe I'm sorry to take you back, but this is somebody who will watch again the movie, or somebody have watched the movie. This is not the end of watching this movie, but I have one request. Before I put this request is I want to let the people in the house or the people who will watch the movie that refugees in this country are not parasites. So the refugees here have not come just to enjoy the thing in America. But here refugees are proven they have ability of working positively. The refugees have the experience on working positively, and some have experiences in the different fields, and some are influenced in English. So refugees have very many ability of being with you here, Americans, and they are able to contribute to the economy of the country. As I myself, I said I have 2 jobs and I pay tax, I do what, even the house I'm living in, I'm renting, so I pay taxi, I pay the electricity, I pay the gas, I pay the bill, so whatever I do. And my children, they're at school, and in the future, they'll do something and they will contribute to the economy of the country. And my wife Chantal also is working. As she's working also, she's paying taxi. So the refugees are not parasites in this country. And the humble request to you people and the people who are outside who watch the movie, my humble request is that pray for my brothers and sisters who are still behind in terrible situation. And if the people who are try to look at the news and listen to the news and to see all over the world, more especially in my country, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, in 20 years, 23 years, peace is not there. So my humble request is pray for those people, and also if they can get a chance of coming, maybe be rescued as I was rescued and with my family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for these words. And in fact, refugees are huge contributors to the American society. No, refugees are not parasites, and we do hope for a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So our afternoon together is coming to an end. I would like to thank again all of our participants who came and joined us today, those who traveled also from the other side of the world. I would like to thank all of you who attended that event and those who watched via the webcast. And finally, I would like also to thank colleagues who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event possible. Rahma Suleiman. Thank you, Rahma. Abdurrahman Olo. Joe Held, which I haven't seen. He's here hiding. Thank you. Aubrey Marshall. Timnit Noor. I don't know where is she. And Chris Richter. Thank you, everyone. And I would just add to that the links of the movies are now on Twitter, IOM@UN, and they will be also posted on the website of IOM New York. Thank you, everyone.
American way. I'm telling you, how New York City. Yeah. Well, you can't you couldn't complain about Brussels either. Come on. I mean, work one. Sticky. Oh, good. So you've made it home already? I see you were posting pictures of vacation. No. Where did you go? Oh, you were on the beach somewhere.